Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I'm going to talk about whether I will write fantasy again. A few years ago I joined the Macclesfield Creative Writing Group. When I first joined I was exclusively a writer of young adult urban fantasy. It was what I read at the time, it is what I had enjoyed since I was a child, and that's how I thought I would spend the rest of my life, writing urban fantasy, branching out into other subgenres of fantasy. And then I finished uni, but whilst being at uni, the books I read had also changed, and I was reading a lot more adult literature, reading more short story collections. I'd started listening to radio plays, writing radio plays about my experiences. I'd always wanted to write a sitcom, and I wrote a radio play sitcom. It's not gone anywhere, but available on my website. In 2011, when I joined the Macclesfield Creative Writing Group, I began to write Our Doris. I was only writing paragraphs. I would write a paragraph because we used to do writing bursts at the start of every session. They'd be on a theme, and I'm terrible with themes, and I'd use the word Our Doris and let my character talk about the theme and talk about what they were thinking. And they were written in this comedic vein, similar to Talking Heads and the comedy I like, which is Victoria Wood, and very, the British comedies. And after a while, people began asking me whether there'd ever be a book. And I was like, no, I'm only doing this because I write fantasy, and I could only see myself as a fantasy writer. I didn't see myself as this writer of all genres and all things, and that writers could even do that, because I was incredibly intent on being published traditionally, and I was incredibly intent on knowing my genre, knowing my market, knowing my brand. What I will do now is I'm going to go further back. I'm going to go to 2007. And on my birthday in 2007, I had this idea for a character and a story, and I was taking part in this novel challenge with some friends from a writers' forum, and I wrote 20,000 words. National Novel Writing Month of that year, I rewrote that novel, and then a year later I rewrote it again, and a year later, and I kept going back to these characters, and after 5 years, which takes us to 2012, I'd finished the book, and a friend of mine who I mentioned in another video, Karen Ross, illustrated me a cover, and then all those copies are now gone. I do have this book, which is The Soul That Rises. Once I finished, I started querying agents, and agents kept getting back in touch, and I was getting form rejections, and I knew I was going to get form rejections. It was just part of the publishing process. I was set. I didn't mind rejections. I'd had the novel critiqued. It was where I wanted it to be after 5 years of work. Whilst I was still querying, I was writing another book, and then I wrote a children's book, and I've decided the children's book is part of a series, so if I ever go back to it, then I'll go back to it. But now I'd been writing Doris for 4 years as little paragraphs to get me through the writing bursts, and someone said to me, am I going to write a book? And then Margaret Holbrook released Cul-de-sac Tales, and I looked at hers, and it's a different character in a cul-de-sac throughout the year, and I thought I could do that with Doris, and that's what I decided to do. And then I put the project aside because I thought, no, Doris has become comfortable. And then, for some reason, and I have no idea why, I decided last year that Doris was going to be a novel. I'd had an agent ask me for the full manuscript of this, then reject it. I had had a publisher have it for 18 months and reject it. I still really respect what I wrote, and I still love the characters, and this book was some of my most well-written prose at the time, but it isn't anymore, and it doesn't represent what I want to be writing. And it's not that I don't respect the urban fantasy as a genre anymore. I still read urban fantasy. I'm still very glad that I went through writing this book, but I think that this is the novel that you put in a drawer. and it was very difficult for me to admit that to myself, and sometimes I will go back and I'll write with the characters, just write them adventures, just because you miss your characters, but I can't see them being published, and it was difficult to admit that. But I also knew that with Doris, originally I was just going to bring out Doris and and give copies to the writers group, but then I decided I wanted to do this properly, and if I was going to do it properly, I was going to independently publish. I was going to set myself up as an independent publisher. I was going to go around libraries and read it. I was going to market it, and of course you have to buy 10 ISBNs, which means I can bring out 10 books, and I had ideas for 3 Doris books, and therefore 3 Doris books will come out, and then other books will come out. And obviously this is Our Doris, which is my book, and it came out in June of this year, and I've gone round and I've read it, and then people know that beforehand I wrote fantasy, and they know that I wrote a children's book. And one of the questions people have started asking me was, will I ever go back to fantasy again? And my answer is now yes, because I have changed my mind. As writers, we have to remember that we aren't constrained ourselves. There are industry standards. There are different people in the publishing industry who want you to have a brand, and you have to forget that. And when I was younger, I wasn't forgetting that. That was what was fueling my writing. And you have to remember that you are a writer, and that you can write whatever you like. And with The Soul That Rises, I was writing what I liked at the time, but it also didn't bring anything new to the genre. And I'm not saying that every book has to do that, but my book was made up of many tropes, many of the same characters, could have been taken straight from Buffy season 5, whereas with this book, I can say that it's completely my own. I can say that it does not have my pretentious prose. It does not have the dialogue problems that I've had before. I write how the sentence should sound, and I've always said that this is a book of monologues, and so I know that in future I will write fantasy again. I have plans for the books that I'm going to write, and one of them is a fantasy novel on a very large scale, and I've considered writing it for National Novel Writing Month, but it's not right for me to write it yet, and it needs planning. And one day I'm going to write another fantasy novel. If I have to publish it myself, I will. My ideas of being traditionally published versus publishing yourself are completely different nowadays. If we went back 5 years ago, independently publishing was out of the window. I would not do it. And now, at the moment, I can only see all traditional publishing offers me is marketing and Waterstones. That's all it offers me, marketing and Waterstones. And yes, it'd be nice to get into more bookshops. Yes, it would be brilliant to have more readers and more people knowing about a book that is very close to my heart, and that I don't mind publicising myself and I don't mind marketing myself, because I like the story, and other people could have written the story, but I realised that they couldn't have written it how I wrote the story. And the same is to be said for fantasy. With that first fantasy book I wrote, I was writing how other people wrote, and anyone else could have written that book. And as a young writer, I was struggling to find my own voice, and I think I found it now, and I hope I found it now, and all that'll happen is that it'll keep evolving, and it'll keep changing. And I know I have not written my best book, but I've written my best book for now. And there we have it. One day, I will write fantasy again. I will write fiction from any genre I like. I will write poetry, I will write scripts, I will write whatever I want. And I will forget about branding and marketing. I'll let the publisher side of myself decide about all of that when we get there. But for now, I have to write a book and finish a cup of tea. I always have tea to finish. So, until next time, that is all.